they're bouncing around the idea of a wealth tax. Now, of course, that'll only go to millionaires and billionaires. But after the millionaires and billionaires, you see, once the practice is in place, they're coming for you. People that earn 25, 50, 75, 100, 150,000, they're not just going to mess around with millionaires and billionaires. They want to control you. And so we have here in the L.A. Slimes a piece by Bruce Ackerman and Ann Allstott. Who are they, Mark? Bruce Ackerman is a left-wing, disgusting professor at Yale Law, as is Ann Allstott. Now, Bruce Ackerman, those of you who are familiar with Liberty and Tyranny, I'm sure you've memorized every word. Bruce Ackerman, I quote him as saying, and he said a lot of things, he writes a lot, he's very prolific, and he's extremely dangerous from an intellectual point of view. He wrote, the progressive vision of frameworks centers on the economy. It needs to be constitutionalized in frameworks to make real the notion of a common citizenship. You got that, Marxist propaganda? So we need to use the law, that is the courts, to constitutionally institutionalize our economic agenda. So there's no escaping it for any American. This is a guy at Yale Law, a professor. Now he writes a piece in the L.A. Slimes with Ann Allstott, a nobody. He says Obama's right to insist on the buffet rule. Millionaires should not be paying income tax at a rate lower than their secretaries. Now, this is a law professor who sounds like a moron, because we all know now, as we did before, but we know for a fact that secretaries pay a lower rate on federal income tax than millionaires. By the way, Mr. Producer, I didn't think we were allowed to call secretaries secretaries anymore. Were we? I'm just trying to remember that. But he writes, correcting this inequity is only a small step toward fairness. What did I just say? God, I love quoting myself. What did I just say? I said that it'll never be enough. Corporate income taxes up. Capital gain taxes up. Federal income taxes for the individual up. Then they're going to want a VAT tax and a this tax and a that. And everything's going to be a loophole wherever you get to keep your money. Oh, that's a loophole. And then they want you to say, well, my neighbor got to do that. Screw my neighbor. But he says the more serious inequality problem facing the United States involves overall wealth, not just income. Oh, here we go. Well, the top 1% of Americans earn 21% of the nation's income. They owned a staggering 35% of the wealth in 2006 to 07. Really? And yet yesterday I cited IRS figures that showed it at 18%. But who am I to debate a class warfare Yale Law professor? He said we should be taxing the wealthy directly, not merely focusing on million-dollar incomes. We propose, by the way, they propose, two moron professors. They propose, they propose it. We propose a 2% annual wealth tax on households owning more than $7.2 million in net assets. Now, many of you are taking your hand, wiping your brow, saying, doesn't affect me. You got to be kidding. It all will affect you one day. You're all going to get ensnared. You're all going to be enslaved. Such a tax would target the 0.5% of Americans at the top of the pyramid and would yield at least $70 billion a year. There's more at stake than fairness. Our proposal would address a deeper issue. There comes a point at which extreme wealth concentration threatens the very existence of democracy. And we are reaching that point. You know, I agree with this to some extent. Where is the greatest wealth concentration? Not just in our country, but on the face of the earth, Mr. Producer. I know I put you in these positions. Where is the most wealth in this country? Government, right? In the government. The government is involved in everything and anything it wants to be involved in. It also, by far, has more resources than anyone, anything, any entity. But that's not what he's talking about. No, he's talking about individuals. So he goes on, Bruce Ackerman, professor, Yale Law. Aren't you lucky at Yale Law? By the way, every Yale Law lawyer I've ever gone up against, I've kicked their asses. Same with you Harvard boys. I'm just saying that as a side point. Being from Temple University and Temple University law myself, we have to be scrappers. You guys walk around like you got cucumbers up your butts. That's a whole other story. Wealth taxation is no novelty, writes Ackerman in his sidekick. In 2008, France, Norway, Switzerland, and 5 other members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development imposed the tax. Italy's considering it. Spain, which dropped such a tax several years ago, now plans to reinstate it as part of a deficit reduction effort. There's only one problem, ladies and gentlemen, with this. Our Constitution does not allow it. No, it doesn't allow it. And Ackerman and his sidekick admit it. Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress plenary power, he writes, to impose any and all taxes, duties, imposts, excises, but it contains a special limit on capitation and other direct taxes. In other words, they can tax commerce of some sort. Income, revenue, transport. That's what they mean by taxes, duties, imposts, and excise. And then the 16th Amendment allows tax on income. But nothing allows you to tax directly accumulated assets. And he writes, under this little-known proviso, it's not little-known, actually. Landmark Legal Foundation and I have litigated this issue in specific. Such taxes may be imposed only if they are apportioned among the states, according to their population. The specifics of this don't matter, but I'm just going to make a point. He says the provision was part of a compromise with the slaveholding South, and its intention was to prevent the North from imposing a head tax on slaves because this could not be apportioned equally among the population of the states. Whatever he says, forget it. The point is this. They can't do this constitutionally. But what Ackerman later writes is, but surely, even this Supreme Court, even the Roberts Court, as conservative as it is, won't be so reactionary as to uphold this provision, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. No way! The courts aren't going to look at the Constitution and actually follow it. Which brings us to the bigger point. These debates about class warfare, about spending, about taxation, involve two things that are rarely discussed. And if anything on this program, I discuss them all the time. And I want them discussed all the time. And I want all of us to think about it whenever we get into these debates. The Constitution and the rights of the individual. These are not academic debates, even though the academy is involved. When you have people talking about what's fair, a balanced approach, tax the rich, when you have people talking about taxing wealth, in essence, nationalizing your pension plan, destroying the value of the currency, that is your savings, your earnings, your paycheck. When you have politicians and bureaucrats destroying your way of life and destroying your ability to make a living through regulations and rules and fiats, The question is, where do they get the constitutional authority to do this? That is, where do they get the constitutional authority to destroy the individual? Obama never talks about the individual. The liberals who parrot his propaganda, they never talk about the individual. They always talk about the poor, the rich, the insurance companies, the oil companies. They never talk about the rights of the individual. Because the individual wants liberty above all else. Liberty to succeed, liberty to fail, liberty to live, to engage in life without being put upon and jerked around and shoved and pushed and tormented by their government. This is why the Founding Fathers rose up. This is why they rose up. Because back then, at least, people cared first and foremost about their individual liberty and their God-given natural right not to be pushed around by authoritarians. And this is not discussed enough, and it's not argued enough. On what basis does Obama have the right to tell anybody how to live or how much money is enough? When did the framers of the Constitution confer power on one citizen who gets elected president to dictate what's enough, what's not enough, and who gets what? Are our men and women today in the battlefield like the men and women during the Revolutionary War? Are they there fighting to protect the president's ability to tell us how to live, where to live, what kind of health care we're going to have, how much of what we earn we get to keep? I go back to first principles, ladies and gentlemen. I go back to first principles. When we get into this debate on how much our neighbor or fellow citizens should be subsidizing you and me, should be subsidizing strangers, should be subsidizing bureaucrats and politicians, when we get into this debate that the government doesn't have enough money, I know that we're gone. I know it's over. Because the issue isn't whether the government has enough money. The issue isn't whether the government has enough bureaucrats, enough power. The issue is does the government represent the will of the people? All the people. And the answer today is no.